welcome. So we have 5 distinguished speakers this afternoon, and so we are going to go right into the program so that we can hear as much as possible from them. So the way that it's going to work is we will have each of them briefly introduce themselves and their work. They each sent us a couple of representative images that we can look at as they're introducing themselves, and then we will have a roundtable discussion for 30 to 40 minutes and open it up to Q&A. So without further ado, Hilary.
Hi there, I'm going to read the comics, the 2 different comics out loud. Adam and Eve, and Eve saying, "The trouble didn't start after I ate the apple. It was after I ate the mushroom. That's when the snake started talking." Okay, and the next comic. The Passover Seder. As the Jews fled Egypt, the heat of the sun baked the bread on their backs, hence matzah. One woman carried a side of beef on her back, and it too slow cooked, resulting in a delicious brisket. Sometimes Al veered from the Haggadah.
Hi, I'm Chari Pere. Apparently, back-to-back panels are not good for my voice, so apologies for that. So I'm here. This is pretty much my mantra since 2020 when I made it, and it's just a picture of me hanging in. How are you holding up? Just hanging in. Just hanging in with,
I cannot relate to this at all.
I figured it was pretty relevant, with the sharks with the lasers and, the scissors hanging by a thread and all. This is an old comic that I did years ago. I had a comic strip called Of Biblical Proportions, which ran in the Orthodox Union's weekly e-newsletter. This is the very first one. It won me a Jerusalem Post New Cartoonist contest. And in each strip, I would take a line or storyline from the Torah and have a modern humorous twist in the second panel. So here, also, Adam, look at that. Look, we're in the same thing. So it says, "And God said, let us make man in our image. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the animals, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. And that's why I want a puppy. No, saith the mom."
Thank you. And moving on, maybe my clicker works. There we go.
Okay. Well, that's me. Well, I'm from Israel, so I had to dig up all the things that are not in Hebrew, and it would work here. This is actually my most successful cartoon ever. I do a daily cartoon in the Ma'ariv newspaper, and I don't know if you know how it is to be a cartoonist these days. You don't get paid much, but usually you did a cartoon. After a couple of days, they wrap fish in it, right? It's not usually. But nowadays, every cartoon goes online, and then you don't know what happens to it. And this cartoon got crazy. I mean, it exploded all over the web. And I remember every Passover, it turns up somewhere, in the WhatsApp groups of Jewish people. And this cartoon, if you notice, I forgot to sign. So if you get it on your, WhatsApp family group, remember that it was mine. Okay, it's like 10 years old.
Have people done the jerky thing that they do online and put their names on it and pretended that they did it? Have they done that?
Wow.
Am I giving...
I have to ask my lawyer.
People aren't nice on the internet? What are you talking about?
That people have done that with my stuff, so I didn't know.
Really?
Yes.
But I guess my stuff's not good enough for them.
I didn't mean to say that.
Okay, that's another cartoon I did.
Yay.
Well, as an Israeli cartoonist who grew up on comics and read too many superhero comics as a kid, I'm in charge of all the cartoons that can be used with superheroes and stuff like that. So this is a cartoon I did. Also, this was published in a normal newspaper, believe it or not. Every time I have an excuse to draw superheroes, I do it. Okay.
You signed your name there. I saw that one.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's
Yeah. This is Arie. I didn't want to interrupt anyone else. But this is the day I became a Potato Pancake, based on the novel by John Updike, and it is a graphic novel for children. 2 people laughed at that. Very good. That got the laughter it deserved. All right. So, It is about the friendship between a boy named Ben and a girl named Naomi, and whether that friendship can survive the fact that Ben gets turned into a walking, talking, sentient potato pancake. I'm not kidding about the fact that it's really about their friendship at its core, and that is sort of the driving force of the story. It's out now from Berman House, and I'm going to be signing copies of it downstairs later today. And this is the Encyclopedia of Epic Myths and Legends, which is a nonfiction book that I wrote. There are two components to this book. It is, on one hand, about its retellings of various ancient myths and legends, and I tried to be much more diverse and inclusive than a lot of other books on myths and legends that I read when I was growing up. And on the other hand, it's also about the effect that these ancient stories have had on modern day pop culture, like Star Wars and the Marvel and DC universes, and Percy Jackson and the Hunger Games and the music of Beyonce and various other things. Really proud of it. It's out now from Quarto.
Hi. My name's Terry LaBan. Oops, my microphone is not cooperating. And I'm a cartoonist. And I have a book coming out. It was supposed to be out in time for this event, but unfortunately it's not. So all I can do is talk about it and wave around my advance copy, or give you a postcard if you want. It's my first middle grade graphic novel. It's called Mendel the Mess-Up. And it's about a boy who can't do anything right, who ends up having to defend his village from a band of Cossacks. I'm a longtime cartoonist. I kind of come out of the alternative comic scene of the 90s. I did a bunch of stuff for Fantagraphics, Dark Horse. I wrote for DC. But in the Jewish sphere, I'm known for doing a comic strip called Edge City that was syndicated for 15 years by King Features. It was about a modern Jewish family. And fun fact, it was the first comic strip that anybody's really identified that showed a Passover Seder in a daily syndicated comic strip. So that was back in 2002. So, and there's an interior page, 200 pages. So it's a good investment, entertainment investment. And I can give you a postcard where you can pre-order it. So see me after the panel. Thank you.
All right, thank you to all of you. So that's a little bit of an introduction to who they are. I suppose I should have said who I am. So I'm Chari Kaplan. I am a professor at the University of Cincinnati. I am a specialist in Jewish humor. I published a book called Funny You Don't Look Funny, Judaism and Humor from the Silent Generation to Millennials that came out last year. And I'm working on a book right now about Jewish characters in DC and Marvel Comics, which is how I got involved with JewCE last year. And so then when they asked me to come back this year, they said, how would you like to do a panel on comedy? And I said, I would love to do a panel on comedy. And here we all are. So let's start with a kind of origin story question to honor the theme of the day. And so I would love to hear each of you maybe tell us a little bit about when you first realized you were funny, and if there was somebody who sort of encouraged you to pursue that direction, if it really came about that you could talk funny and you had to learn how to write funny, or how that sort of evolution went. And maybe we can start down with Terry.
When did I find out I was funny? It was very early on, and as a kid, I was a funny kid. I could always make people laugh interpersonally, which and I don't remember when I realized that, but it must have been when I was very, very young. I mean, I was also a very small kid, and I was kind of easy to mess with. So being funny was both a defense mechanism to deflect people and also a way of gaining social acceptance. But when I created things, they just came out funny. That's just sort of my basic orientation is funny, and I don't really think of it as funny. That's just sort of the way it is. So. But it goes back to very, very deep childhood. And did people encourage me? Generally, no. People told me to shut up and behave, and they would move me to like another part of the room, so I wouldn't talk to my friends. So, but I was encouraged enough, certainly by other kids, that I just kind of kept, I don't know, it was sort of my default thing. And I've been able to make a living at it. and being funny in print, and all these people will say, and I don't want to take up too much more time, but being funny in print is very different than being funny interpersonally, because when you're talking to people, obviously you're taking cues, social cues, but in print they're not there. So so that's something that I've been delighted to find happens as well. So.
Well, as for myself, let's see, a couple things. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, I remember we had to write some essay. I went to an all-Jewish parochial school in Baltimore, Maryland, which is where I grew up. And we had to write like these essays, something in the Torah, and I wrote about the story of Cain and Abel. And I was describing Cain as looking like one of the characters from He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And that got a laugh. And I was like, oh, this is good. I like the feeling of this. And then you fast forward a few years when I was around 13 or 14. I always wanted to be a TV comedy writer, which is what I am, in addition to my work as a comic book writer and an author. But even in those days, I was like, okay, I wonder if I can actually do this. Can I actually make the audience laugh? Can I actually make an audience laugh like my fellow students? So what happened was I was around 13 or 14 years old, and we had this assignment to do a presentation. It was like a public speaking thing in one of our classes. And we had to research a subject and give like a 10 or 15 minute talk on that subject. And so my subject was comedy, and it was supposed to be about the history of comedy. But what I decided to do instead was to do a 10 to 15 minute stand-up routine, making fun of the other teachers and the other kids and everything. And that's what I did. I didn't research a thing. I just went up and did 10 or 15 minutes of stand-up and did a monologue. We were supposed to have charts and graphs and stuff. And so I did have charts and graphs, but not actually ones that I researched. They were, can we curse? Is it okay to? They were bullshit. And so, you know, on TV it counts as a curse. They bleep it out. Anyway, but here's the thing. So like I'm doing this talk. I'm giving the speech, and it feels really good. And everyone in the class is laughing a lot. And my teacher is sitting there in the corner like, and she's not loving it. And some of the other kids who were being singled out, that I was making fun of in my act, I guess it's an act now. I realized like halfway through, they're not loving it either, but everyone really, really liked it. And they were laughing at like everything I was saying. And so afterward, like I should have failed for that. I should have gotten just a big fat F because I didn't do the assignment. And yet in a way I did, because the thing is that the teacher gave me an A because she couldn't deny that everyone else found it really funny. And so obviously I had put a lot of work into it, just not in the way that she wanted me to. And I realized a really important life lesson from that, which is that, oh, if you can make them laugh, that can make you get away with almost anything, because it like changes people's minds, you know? So it taught me a lot. It was a big life lesson. It's also sometimes you got to do the difficult thing that scares the hell out of you, which was that. Anyway, that's my story.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the late 60s and early 70s in Israel, which was the height of the militaristic culture. I mean, they were selling trading cards of generals and flags of the Minister of Defense. It was really a macho culture, and I was just this fair-skinned, bespectacled, the only kid with glasses in the class, and with two old German Jew parents. I was just a beating up waiting to happen. I think it was really what you said, Terry, about survival. I mean, I had to do something to find myself a position in the class that is not. So class clown, I'm not that charismatic to be the class clown. So I started doing comics. I knew how to draw. So I did these funny drawings, and I showed them to the kids, and they laughed, and because there was no internet, I couldn't post it on Facebook or anything. So just passed it around the kids in the class. I remember my father used to do this. I did comic stories. He pressed it, he made it into a little book, and it passed through the class. And they all laughed, and that's how I got much less beaten up than I should have. So I guess it was survival. afterwards, for some reason, at the age of 13, I was attracted to superheroes. For some reason, I stopped doing funny stuff. I did superheroes for a long time, until after the army. And when I was in art school, I found a job doing a cartoon for a youth newspaper, which is what I'm doing to this day, actually the same magazine. And then I said, okay, this has to be funny. I won't do superheroes for Israeli kids. They don't know what it's all about. And that's what I'm doing to this day, actually. But basically, survival, like Terry, I guess.
Should I move this down? So I've been drawing since I was a year old. Oh, thank you. We can share this one. I've been drawing since I was a year old, and I took art lessons since I was 6. But I think the first moment I realized I wanted to do comedy, I drew a picture of Aladdin's genie, and he had fumes coming out of his butt, and he said, "Smell my butt" on top. And my dad thought it was the funniest thing. So I've never done anything with gas humor again. But that's when I'm like, oh, I guess funny is great. And I grew up watching sitcoms like Get Smart, I Dream a Genie, the Dick Van Dyke Show, anything that was on Nick at Night. And then I devoured Mad Magazine, and which is how I met Arie at the first I think it was the last Mad Magazine holiday party.
Was it the last one?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Thank you.
And I grew up reading. I wanted to be a syndicated comic artist. I grew up reading comics like, I don't know, Rhymes with Orange and Edge City. A couple off the top of my head. Even though the industry kind of changed upon the time I graduated from college, I still use my humor however I can. You saw I have the Parsha comics I did for a while. During the pandemic, I had my comic Diary of a Corona Mama Gone Mad, which you saw one of the other comics for. I just use it to cope with craziness in order to make everybody feel a little bit better. So I like being funny when I'm not being very serious about deep comics, which is the other side of my life.
So my story was that I was the youngest of 3, and the airwaves in my family were completely taken, and so I could not get in a word edgewise, and so I went to the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, which was my mic. I mean, it was a space that where I got to express whatever I wanted, and so that was kind of the beginning of it for me. But I'll tell you the story of how I became a cartoonist, which is that I went to the country that many young Jews go to find themselves. It begins with an I. That's right, Ireland. And after a brief stint where I got fired from the pizza place because I didn't have the chops to make pizza. Irish pizza. My folks came to visit, and because I had some holes in my schedule, and in Ireland in Dublin specifically, there's pictures of James Joyce all over the place with his signature round glasses. And I'm taking mom and dad through the Grand Promenade, and there is this giant bronze statue of the man. And my mom sees the statue and the glasses, and she's like, "Oh my God, it's Elton John." And so that there was a humor magazine and a political satire magazine in Dublin. And I rode my bike to the office. I drew that up as a comic. I went up the stairs. I knocked on the door. It was locked. I slipped it under the door. And about 2 weeks later, it showed up in the magazine. And I got my first check. And I feel like at that moment, comics was something not that I just did, but something I could do, And so that launched me. After I graduated from college, I got syndicated. And it doesn't surprise me that based on my background of not having many words to say, or ability to say many words, it's a single panel comic, and so I get paid to write very short sentences.
You and Hemingway. So thank you all. I'm so struck by the diversity of your viewpoints and your experiences, and yet the places where you have very similar resonances and are coming together. And I think this is going to be a really rich conversation. So we're going to bounce around a little bit. We're not going to just kind of run up and down the row because that gets a little deadly. I think based on what I'm hearing from some of you, I would like to hear you think a little bit about this idea of Jewish humor, which is the topic of the panel. And I'm not going to ask you to define Jewish humor because people ask me to do that all the time and it's not possible. But what I would like to know is maybe a little bit about how you see this idea of Jewish humor, however you define it, intersecting with your work. Do you think of yourself primarily as a Jewish creator who's funny, as a humorist who includes Jewish stuff? Where is that intersection for you? And maybe we can start with Arie for this, because you've written for such a variety of publications, for Mad, for DC, for IDW, for Bongo Comics. Did you ever feel like you were including Jewish material there? How did you blend that?
Sometimes I did. It's a good question because sometimes I've written like a handful of overtly Jewish stories for different comic book companies, and then there's some that are sort of subtextually Jewish, and that's true too. So I'll go with the overt stuff first. I wrote a piece for Mad Magazine a long time ago, back when this was like a new, fresh topic to write about. And it was, what if Chris Rock performed at a bar mitzvah? And at the time, he was like considered this like really edgy comic. This shows how long ago it was. And there's nothing against Chris Rock because I think he's a great comic and joke writer. But at the time, he was thought of as being like very R-rated and like, so the joke being like, what if he performed at a bar mitzvah? Originally, I pitched it to the editors as what if Snoop Dogg performed at a bar mitzvah? But they were like, no, some of these jokes would be better as Chris Rock jokes. And so that definitely, and then for a couple of years after that, whenever I was doing lectures, which I do frequently, if I was doing them at like a synagogue, a kid would come up and have me sign a copy because they would, bar mitzvah aged or bat mitzvah aged kids would be very familiar with that. So that was nice. And then a few years after that, I wrote a story for Bongo Comics, which was Matt Groening's comic book company. Matt Groening being the creator of The Simpsons and Futurama, and Disenchantment. I think that's the name of the show. Okay. And it was a story. It's probably it was the beginning of my relationship with Bongo, which I wrote a bunch of stories for. But I think to this day, it's one of my favorite things I've ever written for them. And it was a story where Krusty the Clown, who is canonically Jewish in the Simpsons universe, tries to create a Hanukkah mascot, not really to make all the kids at Hanukkah time feel less lonely, but more to make money. So, because he's Krusty the Clown and he is the worst. And he's like talking to his father, Rabbi Krustovsky, about this, and it becomes very apparent to the reader he knows nothing about his own religion, Krusty, because he tries to, one of the ideas is like Mendel the Hanukkah pig or something like that. And he's completely lost on him that would offend a lot of Jews who keep kosher. Anyway, he ends up with coming up with Flipper the Hanukkah turtle, which is so disturbing to look at that it frightens all the kids in Springfield. And then Kang and Kodos see Flipper the Hanukkah turtle from outer space. They see it on like they're picking up the transmission because this is broadcast on TV, the Flipper the Hanukkah turtle, his big debut. And they see it and they think that it's their winter solstice deity, so they invade the planet Earth to try and get to Flipper. Anyway, and it ends with Kang and Kodos being the new Hanukkah themed characters on Krusty's TV show, and they're wearing fake payas and fake beards and fake yarmulkes and stuff, and they're juggling dreidels and stuff, and there's like a Kang and Kodos menorah in the background, which I'm amazed no one's actually made into real Simpsons merch, because I think that would actually sell, but because their tentacles are the different candle holders. Anyway, I was really happy with the way that came out, but the thing about that story is that it spoke to something real, which is that in the story, one of Krusty's motives is that there aren't really any Hanukkah mascots, just like there are Christmas mascots like Frosty the Snowman, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and so this is his attempt to create one. Again, make a lot of money in the process. But the real thing that it's making fun of, that I actually feel kind of strongly about, is the fact that there aren't real Christmas Hanukkah mascots, and we Jews have to get on that really quickly. Because why not? There should be a Jewish version of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, especially since that song, Rudolph, was written by a Jewish songwriter. Like, the irony is astounding.
The best ones all were.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then around that time, this wasn't necessarily a funny story, but it has humor to it. But I wrote a Superman story for DC called Man of Snow, which Superman battles a snow golem on Hanukkah. And the snow golem, why snow? Because it's more festive, and also there's lots of it around that time of year. It takes place in December. And he realizes that this snow golem has accidentally been sent to attack him by a small Jewish boy who's sick and has a superpower to make inanimate objects come to life. So that's what he did with the golem. And because it's a snow golem, but it's still a golem nonetheless, he's written the word emet on its forehead in Hebrew. And I specifically put that in the script and had like little links for the artist if the artist wasn't Jewish to so you know how to write it. And it turned out pretty well.
Let me jump in because that's my job.
Sure.
I think that's a good segue. I'd love to hear Uri talk about this as well, because you kind of have the experience of writing Jewish stuff into secular publications, whereas, we saw you drawing Superman and Batman, but you're writing primarily for an Israeli audience. So I think it would be really interesting to hear your take on the same sort of question about blending Jewish humor.
Well, I must say, I don't know. First of all, I want to say that although I come from Israel, for me, in many respects, this is the Holy Land here in New York. Because here, Jewish humor that went all over the world was born, Mad Magazine and Harvey Kurtzman. And even lately, I found out that the creator of Asterix, René Goscinny, and Maurice, another French cartoonist, they were also part of that gang. I was asked, yeah, they're Jewish. Goscinny is Jewish. He's Jewish, and this whole gang, they created humor that was spread all over the world. That's unique. I think that's mind blowing how Jewish humor is actually the humor of all media today. The kind of humor that it's a little self-deprecating, that it's a little doesn't take itself too seriously. I think that. But if you mean a Jewish as part of the Jewish tradition, like I do it all the time, because Jewishness is part of what of life in Israel, right? Like I did several times the joke of Shabbat man, Shabbat man, that doesn't work on Shabbat. That people fall from the building and he doesn't do anything because it's Shabbat. That's a joke I use all the time, all the time to criticize the religious parties, the religious politics. So I think this panel, when you're talking about Jewish humor, is if you're talking about the type of humor, of the subject of the humor of Jewish, that's what the thing that it's not so I have to think about, to reflect how to approach this, because all the time I do, because every holiday I have to do, because I work in a magazine that is periodical, I have to do. If you come to my booth now, I brought samples from my magazine, the Zbeng magazine that I do on a monthly basis. I brought the Pesach issue, yes, the Passover issue, and it's full of stories about Passover, and for instance, there was I tried to find sometimes the true meaning of the holidays. For instance, I did several versions of the Haggadah of Pesach in comics form. So one time I did it totally modern. So I made, like, there was this band that does real Northern New York, like Ramones stuff, music, good, authentic music. But then they are being taken over by this, they want to turn them into a boy band. But then, and then the whole story, but the thing is, the climax of the story, the band returns to their roots as a Ramones type band, and they go through the audience, and the audience splits like the Red Sea. So that's a Jewish content, It's like so much part of the DNA of my comics. I can't not do Jewish humor in that respect.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a good segue to bring in Chari as well. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about this, because I know you come out of a modern Orthodox background and you started out writing these Parsha pages. But maybe you can also then segue into the next question, thinking about the fact that people often say that comedy is harder to write than drama. So, maybe you could kind of bridge us to the next question there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came from a very academic background. I went to a private Jewish school for 12 years, where it was not very encouraging towards pursuing humor, except for high school teachers. Like my high school teacher is here, still supporting me. This is Agassi. I also had the opportunity to go to LaGuardia School of Performing Arts for high school, and I decided, no, I want to stay in my Jewish cocoon. And a Jewcoon with my Borscht Belt humor, loved going to the Catskills growing up there. And I spent a good chunk of my career, and I still do, doing humorous work. But it seems to be, and humor is so subjective. It's so subjective. What's funny to me and my growing up on Nick at Night sitcoms is not the same to today's generation or the generation before that or the generation after that. So to write something funny to hit with the majority of the audience is always a challenge. But now I have also a second side to my career where I started out, my first job in college was to do a coloring book for kids with diabetes. And I've tackled difficult subjects like Agunot, a woman who couldn't get her get for after 10 years of a divorce document. And right now I have a fellowship to tell stories about very light subjects like miscarriage and IVF and Down syndrome. And people seem to really relate to that. But what I do, even in all my heavy issues, during the pandemic, I started my Diary of a Corona Mama comics. No matter how tough life is, I try to find the humorous thing, because there's only so much heaviness that people can keep in life, and you need to have a counterbalance. So even in all my heavier stuff, I try to include a little bit of humor to make it a little bit more light, because nobody wants to be down all the time. So it's much easier, though, to relate to the heavier topics than it is the humor. Because like I said, people can relate to stories, and everybody loves to gripe. What would you like to fetch? Who are we if we don't complain, right? So when I write, people like the humorous stuff, but I found it so much easier to write the deeper issues because more people seem to gravitate towards that. And I do try to sneak in the humor to balance it, but it's just it resonates more.
Chari, maybe we can jump to you on this too, because writing certainly a long form novel, you're going to need elements of both, right? People can't laugh for 200 pages, but they also can't cry for 200 pages.
No, they can't. For me, humor is not this separate thing. It's part of a whole. And I mean, for me, the best stuff, the most engaging stuff is stuff that's funny and scary and, exciting all at the same time. And these things aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, the fact is that the mechanisms of horror and the mechanisms of humor are pretty much the same. It's somebody who doesn't, is wrong about something a lot of times, somebody who has expectations that are then inverted. And whether that terrifies us or makes us laugh really depends on timing and presentation more than the material itself. So, when I write a story, the humor comes out of character interactions, not, I'm not telling jokes. I mean, slipping on banana peels and stuff like that. And I actually, in terms of Jewish humor, I actually try to avoid the sort of stereotypical tropes. I mean, even though my story's set in an Eastern European shtetl, I mean, people aren't using Yiddish a lot. People aren't eating, smoked herring, and schmaltz and all that stuff. Not because I think those things are bad, but because I wanted to put my story in a context where people could see the setting in a new way, in a way that, wasn't just all those stereotypes. And that was the same with when we did the comic strip as well. When we did Edge City, it was about a modern Jewish family, fairly assimilated. I mean, they weren't Orthodox, but we made and they had like grandparents and stuff like that, but we made a very conscious choice not to do the Jewish mother and to give all the characters really distinctive character traits that weren't stereotypical and not use a lot of Yiddish and things like that. So, yeah, but the upshot is there's no, a funny story. That because a story's funny doesn't mean it's not scary. It doesn't mean it's not exciting. I mean, you look at a show like Breaking Bad, which is, one of my favorites. It's like you're laughing at the same time you're like holding onto your seat. I mean, to me, that's the best stuff.
Yeah, that's such a good point about, kind of context and setting. And I would love to segue from that to flip it over to Hilary a little bit and to think about what it is about humor that helps you tell your stories, particularly in your case, because you're doing single panel comics. So you don't have 200 pages to develop character, to develop setting. So how does it help you to get your point across to be able to use humor?
When you're doing single panel work, you have to assume that your audience has that every single panel cartoon is you are disrupting a cliche, and by cliche it could be something verbal, but a cliche could be like a stop sign. That's a symbol of that we all understand. And what's interesting about doing a comic strip in a secular newspaper is that when do you do Jewish stuff? And so the first comic I showed was Adam and Eve, and that in the name of my comic is called Rhymes with Orange. And that is something like is very much part of the secular stories, the shared culture that we all have. But then when you do, the second cartoon was about Passover, and that's going into territory that many readers don't know Passover. They just don't know the story. And that doing jokes like that was actually, I had to prove it. So Rhymes with Orange got syndicated in 1995. And I remember very early on doing a cartoon called Jewish Gardening Tips. And it was, you take a poppy seed bagel, you toast it, you eat it with lox and cream cheese, you take the toaster tray out, you dump it into the outdoor, like, what do you call that? Like flower bed, and then the poppies come in by June. So I get a call from my editor, and you never want to get a call from your editor. And he said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, why not? Why not?" And there's such a sensitivity about, it says the word Jewish in it. Well, how are people going to take it? What's going to happen? And we had this very interesting and awkward conversation about cultural stereotypes. And I was like, there are a lot of negative cultural stereotypes about Jews, but eating bagels isn't one of them. And so he's like, oh, I was like, I felt, now I was like, I'd just gotten syndicated. So this was my first kind of Jewish mention. And I was like, let's just run it. Let's run it. And when I did, the response was really great because a large audience of people was like, I'm being seen here. And that doesn't happen much on the comics page. And so there's always this dance, and there's still this dance now. I always try to do something, a Hanukkah strip, a Passover strip, and I've been doing that since the get-go. Which one is too insider? Like matzah is within the realm. Elijah is a little bit farther out of the realm. And there's going to be a Hanukkah strip coming up where the initial gag line was about two parents, they're watching their kids, the kids are gorging on the Hanukkah gelt, and it was, if we're trying to teach kids that money isn't the source of happiness, the chocolate coins aren't helping. Right? But then I had the voice in my head about larger anti-Semitic tropes of like, you can't show Jews talking about money. Right? So it's that kind of internalized anti-Semitism that I'm feeling. And so I then changed it and you'll have to wait till Hanukkah to find out.
I think the idea of just being seen is so important, and I have a feeling that that's really at the heart of what all of the panelists are trying to do, is kind of tap into something real and tap into something something human and humorous. So on that note, we have 15 minutes, so I would love to open it up to the sea of humans out here. I am told that the room microphones should pick you up, but in the interest of, I don't know, things, I might repeat your question to make sure that everybody can hear it. Or we can just let him pass the mic around. Sure. I'm not going to do that, but he can.
I think Hilary touched on this just now, but this is also directed to anyone who would care to answer. Where would you place the line between traditional self-deprecating Jewish humor and humor that, I guess you would say, sells out Jews in a way? Do you think such a line even exists?
No.
Depends how much they pay.
I'm regretting it.
Sorry.
No, that's a
no.
good question. I think it comes back to the fact that I was saying before that everybody, it's so subjective, right? I've done comics not about Jews. Like I had a comic about diabetes that I showed it to my diabetic friend and he thought it was hilarious. Then he put it online and it was not hilarious to a lot of people. So it's such a tough question to ask because humor is so subjective, and some people like dark humor and deprecating, and some people don't. I mean, for me, I guess it's my barometer. If I feel icky writing that joke or seeing that joke, or like give it to my husband, who's my editor for a lot of the things that I do now, and he's like, maybe not, turn to other people, get, a general consensus of an inner circle. And I've learned not to just use one person. You've got to get a few different people. So I guess when you have the people, that you trust, and my dad is here. He also is someone I run ideas by, and has always supported me. So you throw it out to the people that you trust, and if the general consensus is like yay, then I guess it's a good thing. But if not, then maybe something else.
Maybe it's the context also very, very important. The context. For instance, the Charlie Hebdo affair, very, very famous. Yeah. But for somebody who's been following Charlie Hebdo way before the whole thing happened, that everything that's published in Charlie Hebdo is bound to be offensive. That's the whole point of the magazine, to be as offensive as possible. So the problem is online today, you publish something that was on Charlie Hebdo and everybody sees it, so it's a problem. So that's also very, very, when you do something artistic, it always depends where it is published.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think it also just depends on the reality that you're trying to create, really. It depends on, because there's room in comedy, and thank goodness there is, for a variety of tones and a variety of styles. And so, this is an example, the Harley Quinn animated series on HBO, which I like quite a lot. But I know that there's some Jewish people that are offended by that show. Really? Yes, because of the portrayal of certain characters. And that's a show where at least one of the show creators and showrunners is Jewish. And that they're very cognizant of that, of they're not writing the show to offend people, but it's still, can I curse again? Was I limited to one? Okay. It's
They gave it.
Then I will not.
Sorry guys, kids in the front row now. Go ahead.
But basically shows like Harley Quinn or like The Righteous Gemstones or like South Park or like certain other shows, in the end they are about empathy. In the end they are about serious topics like mental health issues and things like that, and becoming the best version of yourself. But there's also a lot of really raunchy humor stuffed on top of that, and so I think in all the shows that I mentioned, well, the only one that really deals with the Jewish protagonist is Harley Quinn. But I mean, it's tough because she's a character who's very rude, and if she wasn't that, she wouldn't feel like herself. But on the other hand, are you playing into Jewish tropes by writing about this character in a certain way? And so I think that's certainly a tightrope that the writers are walking there. And I think that so far they've done a really good job of it.
The kids will ask to watch Harley Quinn now. You're in trouble.
You can watch Lego Harley Quinn, the Lego one, or the DC Superhero Girls version is also I love that show. I think that's DC Superhero Girls is
Well, he's almost in next year and probably watch
Okay,
it.
okay.
Yes, we have another question.
Okay, I have a question for Uri and something related to what Hilary said, but that could be open to everyone. With Uri, I was just wondering, I grew up loving superheroes. How are superheroes viewed in Israel? Are they accepted or are they popular? Are they not popular?
Great question for me, because my claim to fame was that I invented the first ever Israeli superhero, when I was 15 years old, called Sabraman, and I didn't invent the name, by the way. My publisher did. But the thing is, the superheroes, that's a subject that I've been dealing with all my life. Because Jews invented superheroes. That's a Jewish invention. So how come in the Jewish state there are no superheroes? How come they are not? And I think also you have to realize that there's no other place in the world that has superheroes. There's no French superheroes, no Japanese superheroes. That's a unique American Jewish invention. The only place I found a local superhero was the Philippines, of all places. But the thing is, I think there's something Jewish about the superhero. There's something Jewish about looking and waiting for the savior or something, for waiting for the Messiah or something.
I'm not sure that's that Jewish.
What? No, I'm talking historically, not sitting in the shtetl, sitting helpless in the shtetl, waiting for somebody to come save you from the Cossacks. That's what I'm talking about.
It's called Tikkun Olam.
What? Tikkun Olam. So I guess maybe Tikkun Olam. There's something and Israel is the only place that is constantly trying to invent superheroes and failing constantly. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in Hebrew. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds and walking around in tights in the heat. It's terrible. So it doesn't work. And I've tried even after Sabraman to deal with the subject of Israeli superhero. I've done it humorously. I've done it. I don't want to hog the whole thing, but if you look at my Wikipedia page or whatever, you'll find several times I've tried to deal with it and failed all the time. But it's something that fascinates me. Really, thank you for the question.
Okay. And the other question, Hilary said that Bronze with Orange was syndicated in 1995. So I was just wondering, was that the first shot you gave, or was it rejected before? And how do you all deal with, you have to come up with a creative idea that you think is really good, and then it gets rejected? How do you deal with that rejection? Do you just get up and try to fix it, or do you just keep sending it out? What do you do how do you deal with rejection? Like with Rhymes with Orange, was that the first time you tried to get it syndicated, or was it rejected before?
Don't cry, but it was the first time. You know what? I'll and that's been my job since then. What has been rejected is the entire newspaper industry. So I'm feeling it as newspapers have gone down, and the place of comics in newspapers have changed. And I'll just touch upon that briefly. But it used to be comics. Newspaper comics lived within the context of a newspaper, just like you were talking about context, Arie. So you'd have war, famine, tornado, comics, right? It was the sweet treat at the end. Mm-hmm. And as the news has gotten uncoupled from that narrative, flip the page, right? And so now, how comics as I do them haven't found their home on the internet, because they haven't they just exist as small little islands versus having a home in contrast to something else. So it's a tale of woe. But here, I'll open it up to others.
Well, can I just say, I've really been fascinated with this question of rejection and why, why do we do this stuff? I mean, in my experience, most people that end up doing this kind of thing, they're really compelled to do it. I mean, I've often asked myself, why wasn't I compelled to, be really into stocks Like, why wasn't that the thing that obsessed me? Why was it doing cartoons? And I think, in my experience, when you're rejected, right, and I've been rejected a lot, you're sad, right? But then this little thing starts to eat at me, like I have another idea, like I have another idea, like I want to try that. And it just, I always tell my kids, or whoever asks, I create out of, pain. Like, it bugs me more not to create than to create. And at a certain time, when I was working on this book, I mean, I've like a drawer full of like 10 middle grade graphic novels that, never went anywhere. But at a certain point, I just decided, well, I'm just going to be working on a middle grade graphic novel, and maybe they'll never get published, but it bothers me more not to do it than to do it. So I guess it's my fate to just keep doing it. And sure enough, one got sold. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that if it's okay for me to drop in. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that really speaks to me a lot too, because I think that the rejection, you get rejected so much, and you just, to a certain point in your career, when someone rejects you, you're like, wait a minute, this is still happening? This is still, okay, I guess this is still occasionally happening. But the rejections are really, really hurt. But the successes, the acceptance, the times that your work does get accepted, or that you do get something greenlit, that feels great. And also, it means all the hard work was worth it. And also, like Terry was saying, you do it because you have to, because you're compelled to do it. I'm going to tell all of you a really embarrassing true story that has to do with this very event that nobody knows. Well, now you do. Anyway, you're about to. So I'm giving an award at the JewCE Awards later tonight at 6:30. I'm presenting this one award, right? I'm probably just going to introduce myself, make a joke about who I am, and then give the award and get off stage. I wrote a page of jokes for the award ceremony, as though it was the Oscars, because I had to, because I couldn't stop thinking of jokes for all the. So I'm gonna at some point probably go down to like the people who are organizing the awards and be like, look, I got a bunch of jokes for you guys. And they'll be like, that's nice. We can't use them. We have no time to use, but I had to make that, do you know what I mean? I had to like make that list of jokes, because I was like, what if they can use it? And also I can't get these things out of my head. And so to a certain degree, you're doing this because when you're making any kind of comedy, whether it's like writing a script for a movie or TV show, writing a play, writing a novel, drawing a cartoon, drawing a comic strip or a comic book, you're kind of doing it because something inside of you needs to get this out of your system, And so that's certainly something I could relate to.
Well, kind of as a contrast, I feel like I don't wake up to draw. I think that it's my job. So I feel like there's like a certain special yoga position that cartoonists get into called derriere in the chair, right? And so you sit down and your body says, okay, I'm sitting down, and it tells your brain, okay, now is time to start working. So I mean, I guess like you guys seem to have this rocket fuel pushing you along, but I don't have that rocket fuel, or it's not something that's there all the time. But I do think that I was saying earlier on that because I really didn't have much opportunity to talk, I would draw, and I'll never forget showing this picture. I'd done a picture of a bear, and I showed it to my grandmother, and she looked at it and she said, "What a nice dog." And that could have been the end of my cartooning career, right? I could have just folded in to myself right then. But I think what probably every single person on this panel has is this little voice inside of them that's able to say, "Buzz off, Grandma," and keep going, right? And so it's that I have, is that I'm going to keep going.
Well, we are at exactly 2:00, so I think buzz off, Grandma.